In this lecture, we're going to talk about advantages 1 and 2 to the modular nature of life. There are actually what I think are 4 major advantages, and the first one is basically what I'm going to do is kind of put these in a context that hopefully makes sense in everyday terms, so that you can sort of sort them through in your mind and then apply it to the cellular stuff, because these are somewhat a little more abstract in nature than concepts that you guys are used to in other courses. So advantage number 1, I would say, is this: that when you take and build a large structure out of small subunits, that means that you can basically do the same thing, build something large. So the comparison is this: we're going to build a large structure out of subunits, or we're just going to build the large substructure as itself. If we make it out of its component parts, then what that means is that we can basically do the thing with less information and less resources, or at least a smaller variety of resources. So think about it this way: if we are building a cytoskeleton, then we either going to have to construct this ginormous protein fiber with hundreds of thousands of amino acids in it, or what we'll do is we'll make this big fiber out of small little, almost like beads of protein that go into it. And so the trade-off would be we build the humongous fiber, or we build these little subunits that then get put into a fiber. And the cheaper way of doing this would be to build the subunits and then basically put the subunits into the chain to make the fiber. And so, one, that saves us in resources and energy, but it also saves us in information. Information at this point would refer to the genetic information. We'll get into more details on that, but basically the bottom line is that genetic units, these information units of genes, are going to encode a protein. And so if we use a lot of different proteins, then we would have to encode each one of them. But if we use the same one over and over again, we only need the one gene. So it'd be sort of like, if you think about, let's say we have a cupcake business and some conference center ordered 64 cupcakes for a meeting that they're having. So we could choose to make all 64 of the same kind, or we could maybe do let's say 6 of a bunch of different kinds. Well, which one would be best for us as the person having to make cupcakes? So if we were to make carrot cake cupcakes and chocolate cake cupcakes and red velvet cake cupcakes, and they all had their own little icing and so on, every single one of those would require different ingredients. Some might be the same, but each one would require different ingredients. Each one would take a different amount of time to make. Each one is going to require a different recipe. But if we made 64 just regular cupcakes that all had the same icing on it, it would save us in the need of buying things that we basically buy a lot of the same stuff, and we can use that same recipe over and over again. So it just makes life simpler, and that really is kind of the real point here to advantage 1. Another example I've got here would be this one. If you look at these 2 hearts made out of Legos, then which one of these would be technically cheaper to make from the company's perspective? And as you think about it, there's kind of 2 issues here. One would be all of the different sizes, and more importantly, all of the different colors. So in order to make this heart, yeah, there's a few different sizes in here, but you'll notice that most of these pieces are at least similar. Maybe a couple of random pieces in here, but the bottom line is there's no special pieces. And probably more important is the fact that it's all red plastic. So we just need the recipe for red plastic. We just need the machine once we've got it outfitted for red Legos, and it'll spit those out as long as we want, and we can build all the hearts we want. Whereas over here, if we wanted to build something like this, we're going to have special pieces with different effects on them, and of course each one of these with a different color is a different recipe for plastic that has to be made. Maybe we have to clean the machine out between each one. basically there's a lot of extra steps to building something like this from the company side of things than this. So in a resources perspective, in a instructions perspective, and in a energy perspective, this part is much cheaper than this one, just from the components. Okay, so hopefully that'll make sense. For Advantage 2, this is sort of related to that first one. Here we're talking about if we make things out of smaller subunits, then that means that what we're making is smaller. And it tends to make sense that the smaller, if we make smaller stuff, then it is less likely that we will mess up. So, for example, in a cell, you guys will remember ribosomes from intro courses. Ribosomes make proteins, and it's estimated that these guys will make a mistake when they're putting amino acids into a protein about every 3,000 amino acids. So if all of our proteins were over 3,000 amino acids long, what does that mean? That means every single one of them is going to have multiple mistakes in it, or at least one mistake in it. So this could be a very bad thing if those mutations happen to hit amino acids where it's an important piece of the function. So by making shorter proteins, what this means is that we're sort of in the capacity of a ribosome to make these proteins the same way every time and not make mistakes. So shouldn't be surprises then that most human proteins tend to average about 500, and actually most proteins and enzymes tend to be in the 300 to 400 range, which means that any mistakes that happen there are probably because the genetic information at the chromosome level has had a mutation in it. So yeah, these proteins, the longer they would get, the more mistakes we would make. And so therefore, by keeping things shorter, we can then not make those mistakes. And if we don't make the mistakes, it's not going to affect the large structure. If we were trying to make the large structure from scratch, then these mistakes will start to add up. So a good example of this would be a road line where somebody obviously got a little bit lazy about moving this limb off the side of the road, and basically we're coming through here with the line marking machine, and obviously this was not a great job anyway, but then they better make their mistake, keep going. And my question for you would be this: how would this maybe have been different if they were drawing a dotted line? So if they were doing a dotted line out of pieces, then they would have been more likely to lay down some dots and pull the machine up and over and then just keep going, and they wouldn't have had to move the limb in order to make the correct line, and it would not have messed up. Even though this is there, that would not have messed up the dotted line because the segments of that line could have been on either side. So it's not a great example, but hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. The fact that when we do it in pieces, it makes it less likely that we'll have these screw ups in the overall structure. Okay, so it costs us less in energy, resources, and information for the instructions to put them together, and it also helps us to not mess up as much because we're concentrating on just short little pieces, and in those short little pieces we can keep from making mistakes. Okay, so that's advantages 1 and 2. Next time we'll talk about 3 and 4.